tonight, let's consider, before we go in, the game of chess. How many of you enjoy playing the game of chess, either occasionally or right on, or if it's one of those games you absolutely are just frustrated by and say, no way, let that go to other people. So, right, in this game, of course, the opponents try to outmaneuver one another to gain some sort of superiority on the board. All right, the players do not know for certain what exact move their opponent may take, but of course, part of this game is the ability to see that's in your favor. And then, of course, the game of chess has been applied in multiple facets, but here, for our purposes tonight, these principles have often been played out in the geopolitical realm, where nations are constantly making quote-unquote moves to pressure other nations to get what they want or to make them into a decision that will bring the most benefit to the stronger nation. We see this all the time, right? As nations move and they try to make any kind of treaty or any kind of official document. There's always a chess game going on as to who's going to get the upper hand in the end. And of course, this can lead to very tense times when the world stops and kind of holds its breath and waits to see how the other nations are going to respond. And, one of the most climatic moments, of course, was the Cold War. Everyone was waiting to see who was going to try to pull the trigger first, and fortunately, no one did. And so, but this is how the nations work. They wait, and then they make counter moves. And of course, the stakes are much higher in the real world than they are in a traditional game of chess. But here we are. But unlike the game of chess, where the opponents are constantly trying to anticipate each other's moves, God does not given and what the consequences will be. Nothing takes God by surprise because he is indeed still the sovereign ruler of this world. He still sets up nations and he still takes nations down. So here we are in Daniel chapter of the future to Daniel. And tonight he deals with two specific nations that are going to have great impact on the nation of Israel, and they're going to play a part in God's plan of redemption. So we are in Daniel chapter number in his vision. So we have Daniel's vision in verses 1 to 14. And then we have Daniel's vision interpreted in verses 15 to 27. So it divides neatly into two halves. So like last week, we'll read the first half and we'll walk with Daniel as the things that he saw first. And then we'll go and we'll continue on through the text and we'll talk about the interpretation. So Daniel chapter 8, let's start in verses 1 and 2 and get the background. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in a canal. So here we have, it's interesting. Now we're still chronologically between chapters 4 and 5. We're still in the Babylonian Empire. Belshazzar is still on the throne here. He hasn't been displaced as of yet. And then here, interestingly, an interesting note, of course, in the original languages, there's a switch at this point from Aramaic back to Hebrew. And the consensus is typically that Daniel's chapters 8 through 12 will finish out the book in Hebrew, and it's because those chapters specify on the future, particularly to Israel, and the relationship with the coming Gentile nations. And so this is mainly for Israel. So we've kind of broken from, he had a little bit in Aramaic from chapters 2 to 7, and that where God was dealing with the immediate Gentile nations. But now he switches back to Hebrew, and he's going to focus on what's coming up for the nation of Israel. And so in this vision, Daniel is transported to Susa, which is going to be a royal palace of Persia, and it's about 200 miles east of Babylon. So I don't believe he was specifically traveled there, but he was transported there to see this vision. And of course, Susa, we know, it will come up later in the scriptures. Of course, it'll be where Esther is going to live in the palace, and her story is going to be played out. And of course, it's where Nehemiah gets his calling, that the wall before those things in Babylon. So there's where he's at in the vision. He's being transported there. So now let's look to see what he sees, starting in verse number 3. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the banks of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. It's a ram, all right, and it has 2 horns. One's a little higher than the other, which may not be too typically unusual, but so we have this ram, and the greater horn comes up last in his vision, and he sees the ram. He charges northward, he charges westward and southward, and no beast can stop him. He becomes great, and he does what he pleases. So clearly this ram seems to be in charge at the moment, but that is going to quickly take a change here, as we're going to see. So let's see what else Daniel sees now in verse number 5. And as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west, across the face of the whole earth, without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and struck the ram, and broke his 2 horns, and the ram had no power to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great. When he was strong, then the great horn was broken, and instead of it, where there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. So now let's stop here. Now we have a second animal coming into this vision. So we have the ram, who seems to be in charge, and then we have this goat that comes charging in from the west. And he has 1 great horn, and he charges with great speed, and it even gives the impression that he doesn't even have to touch the earth. He's moving very quickly. And of course, he charges the ram, and he overpowers him. He breaks his horns, and he tramples him. The ram is no longer. So now the goat becomes great and was strong, and he had this 1 horn. But then this 1 horn that got him so much was then broken, and it was divided, and then 4 horns came up after it. And so now we have this picture. The ram is gone, the goat is there, and now there's 4 little horns. And then Daniel looks a little bit further. Let's go to verse number 9, and he's going to see some more interesting things. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression. And it will throw truth to the ground. Vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary, and hosts to be trampled underfoot. And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. These 4 horns come 1 little horn, and it grew to be great. And we see that this little horn was very violent. It would be a little horn. However, we did learn whatever he did, it would not last forever. There was a time limit to it. And of course, Daniel understood this because of 2 holy ones, it seems, probably angels, apparently standing there discussing this vision as well. So now we have this vision, and as we'll see in verse number 15, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And if we had nothing else to go on, we'd be right there with Daniel, right? This doesn't make any sense, all right? We see these things, but we need a little bit of help. And so Daniel's going to get some help. So now we're at point number 2. Daniel's vision is given an interpretation in verses 15 to 27. So let's look at who Daniel gets some help from, verses 15 to 19. And behold, there stood before me 1 having the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O son of man, that the vision is for the time of the end. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand up. And he said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation. for it refers to the appointed time of the end. Here, Daniel hears a voice, and this voice is unspecified. So it is part of the mystery here. You could talk about it till the cows come home. We don't know who this voice is, but he commands this Gabriel to come and give Daniel the understanding. So, and here, this is the first time that Gabriel is called by name. Another angel in the book of Daniel, so Daniel's unique for the specified angelic names in the scripture. So Gabriel comes, and of course Daniel's encounter with Gabriel is very similar to the, and well, quite frankly, so would we be, right? And so he falls down and he falls asleep, and Gabriel has to help him back up and awaken him. It is indeed for the time of the end, and even for, quote, the latter end of the indignation. Now, we won't talk about it directly right now, but this gives a little hint to what the prophecy could be, but unfortunately, it's not very, these phrases aren't really specified either. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia, and the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which four other arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of the kingdom where the transgressions have reached their limit, a king of bold face, who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are in the saints. By his cunning he shall make a deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many. He shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And so here we have this interpretation. So let's kind of slowly go through it here. Of course, the ram here represents the kings of Media and Persia, which still is future for Daniel in the direction of Babylon and this great war. And at the end of this kingdom, a bold king will come who has power, who causes destruction, who destroys the saints, who causes widespread deceit, who defies God. But again, just like we saw in Daniel's portion of this little horn, his end is indeed coming. It will not be forever, and he will not be destroyed by a human hand. And again, the vision of the evening is still true, and to seal up the vision for again and again, he mentions this phrase, it is for the end. And of course, Daniel's response is probably very much like we would be in verse 27. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I arose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. And so Daniel was ill for some days and had to rest from this. And when he was better, he got up and he continued his responsibilities. He went right back to work for the king. But very similar to the previous chapter, it's just too much for Daniel. What is he supposed to do with all this incredible information that he has been given? And so now we have chapter 8. But now let's try to bridge some gaps as best as we can here. So now on this side of history, we can look back and we kind of piece together the events of this chapter and the events of this prophecy a little better than Daniel could, because obviously he was still very much beforehand. And because he had seen it, he was writing because God had revealed it to him. So this is still very much, unlike the critics will call Daniel a historian, he is very much still a prophet, and God is giving him direct revelation for this. And of course, this is referring to mainly the intertestamental period, right? So often this time period has been called the 400 silent years between the whole Old Testament and the New Testament. But really, this, even though there was no divine revelation, and even though this is, quote, silent, it was not an inactive time. God's plan of redemption was still very much pressing on, even in the silence. And so there is a lot of action in the intertestamental period, and it's a fascinating period of history to study. We'll hit some highlights tonight, but obviously we don't have time to go through everything. And so now let's look at what we do know from this prophecy before we lean into that which we are a little more unsure of. And so obviously he gives some history here. We do know from history that obviously the Medes and the Persians did come and they did conquer Babylon. We saw that in the previous chapter. They are the next big kingdom to come in, and they will rule for a period of time. And then, of course, Alexander the Great, and he will rush in with quite a ferocity and conquer more land in such a short period of time that hasn't been seen. He will conquer huge portions known to the world, including the Medes and the Persians. So he does indeed go in and stomp them clean and even make his way to the exteriors of what we'd call India today, before his troops finally said, enough is enough, we need to go back home. And so Alexander starts to make his way of possibly infection, possibly poison, or possibly just the copious amounts of alcohol that he supposedly drank. And so he was about 33 years old when he died on the way back from his conquerings. And it's interesting, in fact, according to historians, Alexander did indeed die in Babylon, near Babylon, if not in Babylon, which is interesting because almost likely with no knowledge that 300 years earlier, it was in the same city that God had given Daniel this revelation that indeed the rise and death of this young prince. And so history indeed has a way of coming back around. And so here, after some bickering, all right, so his 4 generals and fighting, Cassander will rule Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus will rule Thrace and Asia Minor. Seleucus will rule northern Syria and Mesopotamia. And Ptolemy will rule southern Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. And of course, right in the middle of between the Ptolemies and the Seleucians, of course, is this little strip of land right up against the Mediterranean Sea, and it's called the land of Israel. And of course, right in that land of Israel is this perfect roadway that connects these two, and it will be fought over mercilessly between these 2 generals as to who has control of this strip of land. And of course, here we have the returning Jews from the Babylonian captivities who are caught right in the middle. And here history is going to play itself out in preparation for the coming Messiah. And so here we have this. Now let's start to go into a little bit of more of the unknown in this prophecy. Of course, we have this little horn that raises up that we saw. And again, a little bit is told about him, but his identity is not fully divulged here. Now, most commentators will come and they'll attribute this little horn to a Seleucid king who will come to power, and he'll reign from 223 to 187 BC. And this Seleucid king's name is Antiochus on the Jews and those who he comes in contact with. And his main priority was what Alexander had started, which was the Hellenization of the known world. He wanted to spread the Greek culture, he wanted to spread the Greek language, and of course, Greek religion, and by any means necessary. And of course, the Jews who had come back from exile, they were in no mood to go back and to surrender there. And so thus there was going to be a lot of fighting. Now, Antiochus is an interesting fellow, and again, we don't have time to go into everything about him, but his tyranny does indeed include, he did try to go and conquer Egypt. It didn't really go well for him, and that's for them either. So he decided to turn his wrath against Jerusalem. And he did indeed attack Jerusalem several times and other Jews, and he tried to force Hellenization on them. And he did indeed sack the temple, and he offered a pig sacrifice to his Greek gods and set that up. And he did decimate their temple, not completely destroy it, but. And then, of course, this is going to cause the Jewish revolt to come up, and eventually, now Antiochus will die, but he'll die of some sort of disease, some sort of fever will get him. The Jews won't physically kill him, but he'll be out of the picture. And of course, the Jewish revolt is successful until the Romans get there, for the most part. And of course, this then goes into the restoration of the temple, and is now called the Feast of Dedication, or today Hanukkah. And so this is where that feast comes from. And so here we have, and so now what do we do with all these? So chapter 8. So we have all these pieces together. Let's try to put them together a little bit. The commentators take 3 main interpretations on this passage. The first one is historical fulfillment. They look at this passage, they say it's been completely fulfilled within the time frame given in history with the coming Greeks and the Antiochus as the ruler, as the little horn, and it's been fulfilled. It was prophecy when Daniel had it, but then it was fulfilled when the Greeks came in. So that is one route we could take. Another, and these are the main routes, there are all kinds of little routes that some commentators take. So these are the main ones. So you have this historical fulfillment, and then you have a future fulfillment. Some people look at this and say, this hasn't been fulfilled yet. This is still very much future, because they rely heavily on what Gabriel said. This is for the end of the times. And so they take that phrase and they mean toward the end of the whole Gentile kingdoms up till when Christ returns. Take the first half of this prophecy and say, okay, this was fulfilled within the Greek Empire that came in, but there's still a second portion that has not been fulfilled yet. And typically, when you look at the interpretation that Gabriel gives, verse 23 is the transition period. And so you have verses 20 to 22 describing that has not been, that has not happened yet, that we are still looking for. So this is more of a hybrid view. It takes both of them. And this is typically where the split is. And obviously, if you read others, sometimes the split in the verses are a little bit differently. But as of right now, I think this seems to make the most sense. Obviously, we know history was fulfilled. God not adding to Scripture or altering this. We have this little horn reminiscent of what we saw in chapter number 7 and the fourth kingdom, and that a little horn that'll rise up. And what do we do? So let's look at some applications here. So Antiochus, no matter where you put him, is probably, we could kind of view him as an unofficial type, one of those beastly rulers that we saw in chapter 7, one of these beastly empires that come in that are very much against God, very much against his people, and will do everything he can to displace them. And so Antiochus, we could say, is probably an unofficial type of one of these beastly rulers that is against God and that fights against his people. And chapter 8 is, once again, it's a similar picture, but from a different angle. We see these different empires that are going to rise and they're going to fall, and they are going to be very much against God. They're going to be very much against his people, and they're going to do everything they can to make their lives miserable. But once again, we see their time is limited. It is not going to be forever. When the two angels were talking, it's going to be 2,300 morning and evenings until it is restored again. So it still leaves you with a message of hope. So let's push on. So there is no such thing. So for the application, point number 1, there is no such thing as pure human autonomy. You talk to any of these rulers, you talk to any of these kings, these dictators that come in, is indeed powerful enough. I set how I rule, and this is what I do, and they set themselves up, but it's just not true. The majority of human rulers view themselves as special because it was their strength and wit that brought them that position, that brought them that power, that brought them in charge of that land. But behind the scenes, it is God who ordains rule. The things that he do will indeed be used for good in the end. So there's no such thing as pure human autonomy ordained. If you think back to even into the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3, what did God say when he was talking to Adam and Eve and the serpent? He said that he was going to put enmity between the woman and the serpent. Opposition have faced in the past, and he's fully aware of the opposition that we face today around the world, and he's fully aware of the opposition that we will face in the future. He's not unaware of who we have to challenge and who challenges him. And then the opposition that we do face today does indeed have a time limit. It won't be forever. And so God has his limit. He has his time, and when he says enough is enough, there is nothing that they can do about it. And so opposition does have a time limit. And then opposition that we face is not greater than the plan of God. Even though during this time, during any time in history when there's increased opposition, when there's increased fighting, when there's increased, we don't want to face that, but it's not greater than the plan of God. His plan is far superior to any of his enemies' plans. So opposition is God ordained. He's still in charge. He still allows it, but he won't allow it to go on forever. And so when we look back at Antiochus and the things that he did during this time, I'm sure that he had no idea that, and one of the things that Antiochus did and he was known for is he minted a coin, and you can still see these coins with a title. He called himself Antiochus Epiphanes, and so he thought to elevate himself to a form of deity, and that's what Epiphanes meant. And so he minted coins with his image and with that title. He thought he was one of the gods. He thought he was that special. But he had no idea that 200 years later, after him, the one and only true God-man would be walking in the same temple that he thought to sack and that he thought he could take over at Jerusalem. Jesus would be walking in there in John chapter 10 at the Feast of Dedication when they rededicated the temple back to the ordinary sacrifices. And so Andrew was. And so God turns even the wrath of men to his praises. The Hellenized world that Alexander and Antiochus and the other Greek kings set up is actually there to help God use to establish the spread of the New Testament through the Greek language after Jesus came and returned to heaven. It was a perfect setup between the Greeks and the Romans to spread his word. He used their, as much as they desired to stamp out Judaism, he used, however you want to label this Antiochus Epiphanes, no matter how much power they accumulate, no matter how much land they take, no matter how many people they kill, none will be able to stand before the Lord Jesus Christ when he returns. It won't be us, but we will get to be there to witness such things. So let's close today and turn to Psalm chapter 76. It's only 12 verses, but I think it's a fitting end to this message. There are still mysteries in Daniel chapter 8 that we will just have to wait until time reveals them. But one thing we do know is God is still very much in charge. That's still the theme of Daniel. God is still sovereign. And I think Psalm 76 will help kind of encapsulate this for us for the end of the evening. So Psalm 76, we'll read verses 1 to 12. In Judah, God is known. His name is great in Israel. His abode has been established in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. There he broke the flashing arrows, the shield, the sword, and the weapons of war. Glorious are you, more majestic than the mountains full of prey. The stout-hearted were stripped of their spoil. They sank into sleep. All the men of war were unable to use their hands. At your rebuke, O God of Jacob, both rider and horse lay stunned. But you are to be feared. Who can stand before you when once your anger is roused? From the heavens you uttered judgment. The earth feared and was still. When God arose to establish judgment, to save all the humble of the earth. Surely the wrath of man shall praise you. The remnant of wrath you will put on like a belt. Make your vows to the Lord your God and perform them. Let all around him bring gifts to him who is to be feared, who cuts off the spirit of princes, who is to be feared once more, that you are indeed the sovereign ruler of the universe. Now, Father, there is nothing that surprises you or takes you back. You are indeed in complete control in your sovereign will, in your sovereign timing. And Father, we trust that you know and that you will lead us and guide us in the way. Father, no matter what opposition comes, we know that you have ordained it. And Father, it is for your honor and for your glory that it has been set up. And Father, I pray that we would learn to trust you no matter what, and to establish perfect righteousness and peace that we can live in. Lord, may our lives honor and glorify you. May our lives be reflected in this truth that we truly do indeed